Thanks to the pandemic, it's taken a while, but I have finally gotten my hands on the smallest Genesis sedan in America. This is the 2022 G70, and it competes very directly with the BMW 3 Series, Lexus IS, and Mercedes-Benz C-Class. Like the Lexus IS, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle that has definitely been focused on driving precision, but unlike the Lexus IS, Genesis gives us an all-turbocharged engine lineup. We are going to see more power in the new IS 500, but this twin-turbo 6 is not competing with that IS 500. This is going to be similarly priced to the IS 350. So you get an awful lot more oomph, twin turbos, 365 horsepower for the price of a 3.5-liter naturally aspirated Lexus. If you haven't already done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen because I will have the Lexus IS 500 in for a full review very, very soon. But back to the Genesis G70. The G70 is one of my favorite compact luxury sedans because the value proposition is excellent. Pricing on the G70 is definitely below most of the European competition, right in line with where we see Lexus. But unlike the Lexus brand, we get more power under the hood and a little bit more fun baked into the pie. We have an 8-speed automatic transmission, and if you get the all-wheel drive version of the Genesis G70 with the 3.3-liter turbo, you get a new drift control mode. For 2022, the big change happens up front, where we find a new grille design that makes this look a lot more similar to the larger G80 and G90 with the distinctive quad headlight arrangement that we find in those models as well. In the front, these are actually separate modules integrated into the bumper, so one module up top, one module down below, and then there are 4 LED modules in each side. No fog lights below in this trim. At the bottom of the bumper, we have well-integrated parking sensors and a lot of grille openings down there for additional cooling. I have to say that this grille design has grown on me, and in the G70, it's the smallest iteration of this Superman-style grille. Inside the lower grille segments, we find the parking sensors. The radar sensor is right here in the middle of this Superman shield grille, and then we have a 360-degree camera option right there just above it. Moving around to the side, the headlights wrap around a little bit, but not quite as much as we find in the more expensive Genesis models. But they have redesigned almost the entire sheet metal of the vehicle. The quarter panels, front and back, are slightly different than they were before. On this front quarter panel, it's to integrate that little vent, and of course, the headlight that ducks in right there into the metal. At 184.4 inches long, the G70 is right in the thick of things for a compact luxury sedan. It's almost exactly the same size as the Mercedes-Benz C-Class and the Lexus IS. And like the Mercedes and the Lexus, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so a little bit different than the proportions that you'll find in the Volvo S60, although Volvo tries to disguise it with a slightly longer hood profile. Stretching around to the rear, we have tail lamp modules that wrap from the rear onto the side right there. Not too much of a change going on back here in the rear versus 2020. The quad lamp theme continues out back where we find full LED tail lamp modules. The turn signals are red here, and they're bisected by a body-colored strip that's integrated into the tail lamp module itself. The backup lights are down here at the bottom. We then have well-integrated exhaust tips at the bottom of the bumper. The trunk lid gets a subtle ducktail spoiler. We find the backup camera and the button to release the trunk lid right there in the middle. And then part of the trunk lid is a composite element. So the top is metal. This face right here is composite. Unlike many of the German options, the G70 comes with a ton of driver assistance technologies standard on every trim. We get radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection, blind spot warning, rear cross traffic detection, lane keeping assistance, lane departure warning, etc., all standard on every model. There's also a new center airbag, which is kind of an interesting twist. We don't find this in too many luxury vehicles just yet, but this vehicle actually has an airbag between the front seats so that the driver and front passenger don't bump noggins in the event of a side impact. This model has everything that Genesis offers on it, including the 360-degree camera system that also includes a lane watch feature where it'll project a little image of your turn signal in the center cluster as you turn your turn signal on. We also have a heads-up display as well. Instead of borrowing the larger 2.5-liter turbo and 3.5-liter turbo engines from the G80, Genesis decided to stick with the same engine lineup that we found last year. So the base engine is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo producing 252 horsepower. It's mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission, and you'll get 24 miles per gallon with rear-wheel drive. We then have this 3.3-liter twin-turbo V6. This produces 365 horsepower and 376 pound-feet of torque. If you get the new optional sport exhaust system, which adds a valve in the rear exhaust, then things will bump up by 3 horsepower. As before, all-wheel drive is offered. If you choose that option box with this engine, your fuel economy drops down to 20 miles per gallon, but you do get a new all-wheel drive drift mode feature. This particular model is a rear-wheel drive Sport Prestige trim, so this one gets 21 miles per gallon combined. Front seat comfort's definitely good in the G70. I give this particular model 9 out of 10 points. This has the most adjustable seat available, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable side bolsters, and a power extending thigh cushion. Rather unfortunately, as we see in other Genesis models, the front passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. This is also something that we see in a decent number of Lexus vehicles. It lacks the extending thigh cushion and the inflatable bolsters, but thankfully it does have the four-way lumbar support. We have a two-position driver's memory over here on the door, and that controls not just the seat and the mirrors, but also the powered tilt telescopic steering column. If you want more comfortable seats in the luxury compact sedan segment, they are available. You will find adaptive front seat massage in something like the Volvo S60, but it's going to cost you more than this model that I'm driving. Jumping into the back seat, we have a pretty similar amount of legroom to the IS, the Giulia S60 A4 and 3 series, but less headroom than most of the competition. That does strike me a little funny because the seat bottom cushion is nice and long. This is actually something that I prefer. Now, kids and shorter people are going to find the seat bottom cushion strangely long, but for my legs, this is just about right. Unfortunately, the footwell is also a little bit small. So if this had been a bigger sedan, this seat bottom cushion length would be just about perfect for me. Keep in mind, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so if I try and move over here to the middle, there's a pretty decent hump because the drive shaft has to go all the way to the back. If you want something that has more of a flat floor design, you'll find a flatter floor in the S60. Also, of course, any of the electric competition in this segment. Headroom is definitely more limited right back here. If I scoot over to the right side, then I have the ability to move this seat all the way back in its tracks due to some power controls over there on the driver's side, and ow, I think that's pretty much just crushed my feet. As with most compact luxury sedans, remember that the interior is going to be about the same size in here as a Corolla or a Civic, so you'll certainly find more room in something like an Accord or a Camry. Compact is definitely the key word here. If you want more room, there's a Genesis G80, and if you want even more room, there's a Genesis G90. But that said, there is certainly enough room in here for 4 6-foot-tall adults to have absolutely no problem for an hour or two. Again, keep in mind the longer seat bottom cushion if you have kids or you routinely put people with shorter legs in the back. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. There's no ski pass-through, so we just have that 60-40 design. We have a fold-down center armrest in the rear, but all 5 seat belts are red, which is definitely a cute touch. Behind the trunk lid, we find one of the smaller cargo areas in this segment at 10.5 cubic feet. Part of that likely has to do with the hinge design. These hinges do occupy a bit of cargo space, but a larger portion of it probably has to do with the fact that we have a spare tire under the load floor, and that is something that we don't find in most of the European competition. If you were to delete this spare tire yourself and just leave it at home, you would gain access to a few cubic feet of extra storage space, and that would likely put this around 13 cubic feet, pretty similar to most of the European competition. When it comes to the exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to give this sedan 8 out of 10 points. It obviously loses points for having a small trunk, but it gains points for having that temporary spare tire under the floor. We also have a little helper handle to help you close the trunk lid. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that the MSRP on this one is $52,000. This module contains the camera systems for the adaptive safety systems. We have a sunglass holder there, Alcantara style suede headliner. It's not real suede, it is imitation suede. They have the controls for the sunroof right there. And this is a slightly larger than normal sunroof, although it is not a panoramic design. You can see it extends to just behind that B pillar. A lot of folks have been asking me to comment on sun visors. The sun visors in this model are a sliding design, which is definitely a nice touch. We find two-way adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger, and all 5 seating positions get the red seat belts you see here. As you'd expect in a sports sedan, we have a ton of red stitching going on in here. A little interesting touch is this plastic insert right there in the seat back. It has some trim that mimics what's going on the doors and on the dashboard. We then have red quilted stitching right there in the bulk of the seat section, seat back and seat bottom cushion. Again, the bolsters on the passenger seat are not adjustable, but they are adjustable over on the driver's side. More of that quilting goes on the front doors and on the rear doors. These are a combination of different trims here, so you can actually see if we zoom in on here that the trim around that door handle and the trim around the speaker grille are not actually the same material. As with other luxury vehicles, there are a variety of different trim options and color options inside depending on the version of the vehicle that you're looking at. This model has the Lexicon audio system. There's also a large storage cubby down there at the bottom of the door. Moving over to the dashboard, a lot of the shapes are pretty similar to the previous G70, but you'll notice the big change right here in the middle of the dashboard. We have a new, much larger touchscreen infotainment system. This is just over 10 inches. It supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it is a touchscreen system. The software is very similar to what we see in the rest of the Genesis lineup. So if I click over here to the Genesis home screen, you'll notice that all the buttons and icons are pretty much the same as we find in the G70 and G80, but we don't have any sort of touch controller or rotary knob controller or anything like that going on with the system. 2 large air vents there, the engine start-stop button, controls for the infotainment system, climate control system, Qi wireless charging mat, but you'll notice that my smartphone is plugged in via the USB cable. For some reason, this particular system does not support wireless CarPlay yet. This is pretty similar to what we see in other Hyundai and Kia products. For some reason, their larger system doesn't support wireless CarPlay yet. That might happen at some point in the future. We have a joystick style shifter. There's an unlock button right there on the side, pull down for drive, push forward for reverse. Park is that button right there. We have a drive mode toggle here, and new for 2022, we have a Sport Plus mode. This also enables the drift control mode that you'll find in the all-wheel drive version. We have auto brake hold, parking sensor button. This also brings up the 360-degree camera system, emergency brake right there, 2 large cup holders, and then a very large padded center console. That opens to reveal a pretty small storage area. Keep in mind this is a rear-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive vehicle, so there is a drive shaft under this area of the center console. There's a USB charge-only port right there. The instrument cluster is a partial LCD, partial analog design. We have an analog speedometer over here on the right side with an analog fuel gauge. Everything else is being delivered by an approximately 7-inch LCD on the right. In addition to your typical trip computer readouts, you'll also find driver attention monitoring, some additional gauge readouts, turbo pressure, etc. But this display does not change appreciably when you move from drive mode to drive mode. So Eco, Sport, Sport Plus, etc. We don't find different tachometer designs over here on the right. As we see in other Genesis models, when you turn on the turn signal, if the vehicle has the 360-degree camera system, we have a turn signal display right here on this side. Whether we go left or right, it occupies that same section of the display. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design. I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get the new G80 or GV80 steering wheel. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. We have paddle shifters on the back, controls for the infotainment system over here on the left side, and the controls for the cruise control system and adaptive cruise control system over here on the right. The steering wheel icon engages and disengages the highway driving assist system. That's what Genesis calls their semi-autonomous highway assistant. Out on the road, the G70 has a very different feel than its most natural competitor, which I would say is the Lexus IS350 when we're talking about this 3.3-liter twin-turbo model. 0 to 60 happened in this vehicle in 4.5 seconds. That's 1/10 of a second faster than the last G70 that I drove. That's likely to do with the weight of the rear-wheel drive vehicle. This is lighter than the all-wheel drive option that I last tested. This also has summer tires on it, and if it gets a good grip, you'll go 0 to 60 faster than the slightly heavier all-wheel drive model. If, however, the conditions are a little bit slick or you're out on gravel or rougher road surfaces, the all-wheel drive model is probably going to be faster anytime. Now, that places this right between the Lexus IS350 in terms of acceleration and the BMW M340i. The M340i is significantly faster than this. But the G70 has the sense of urgency that we find in those turbocharged European sedans. When you floor it, you get massive amounts of torque, a lot of acceleration, and you just don't see that in the Lexus IS. The IS is, I guess you'd say, in some ways better balanced because the handling and the power delivery and everything like that is very holistically designed, and this has a bit more oomph than handling ability perhaps, but I think that makes this more fun. It still has the precision that you'd expect in a luxury sedan, however. I actually like the way the steering and suspension is tuned in this just about as much as the Lexus IS, and the IS has one of the best steering feels in this segment. The Genesis 8-speed automatic transmission was designed in-house by Genesis and Hyundai, and this definitely has a better feel than the Aisin 8-speed that we find in the Lexus IS. It's also worth noting that if you get the all-wheel drive versions of the IS, then you don't get the 8-speed automatic. You actually get an older 6-speed design, so 0 to 60 performance is going to be quite different if you choose all-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. When it comes to the handling score, I'm certainly going to give the G70 an A. Keep in mind, again, this model has summer tires on it, but this just has a fun factor that you don't find in all the competition. This reminds me an awful lot of the Jaguar XE, which is now recently departed, because that too had a really great suspension tune, great steering feel, and the thrust that you don't find in something like, again, the Lexus IS. But this is a little bit different than some of the German competition. The overall feel of the vehicle reminds me a little bit more of modern BMW models than something like the Alfa Romeo Giulia. The Giulia is an absolute hoot and a half to drive. It's a little bit more precise, a little bit tighter than this, and this, like the BMW, is actually a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more daily driver livable. Bearing in mind that the model that I'm driving has the optional adaptive suspension system, I'm going to give ride quality an A-. The G70 is certainly focused on the sportier side of this segment, even though they don't have a model that competes with something like the BMW M3 or a C63 AMG. Instead, this model is targeted at vehicles like perhaps the M340i. This is not going to be as quick as an M340i, of course, as I said before, but the tuning of the vehicle is very along those lines. If you want something a little bit more comfortable, the Infiniti is going to be a little bit softer than this. Some versions of the Volvo may also be a little bit softer as well. In my cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, I measured 70 decibels in here, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A- when it comes to cabin noise. You will find a few quieter options, but not too many. And I was especially impressed by the fact that this does have, again, the summer tires on it, and the cabin noise score was still pretty decent. Fuel economy is still an area where the G70 lags the competition. And if you put this in the Sport and Sport Plus modes, you'll notice that the fuel economy will definitely drop a little bit further because this is much more eager at retaining low gear ratios. Genesis has tweaked the stability control, the traction control, and the drivetrain control systems in this vehicle to give us the new Sport Plus mode, the drift control mode with all-wheel drive, and the Sport Plus mode holding those gears longer for a little bit more fun out on your favorite winding mountain road. And you'll also notice that just with so much torque, the rear end of this vehicle is more lively than you might expect. Certainly way more lively than an IS350. This is probably going to be similar in terms of the rear wheel action to something like the new upcoming IS500, although that is going to be more powerful than this. But back to fuel economy. This model is rated for 21 mpg. I've been averaging 19.5 over a week of mixed driving. That logically has something to do with the amount of fun that I've been having in the G70, but any way you slice it, even if you got the EPA rating in this vehicle, you will find more fuel-efficient options from the European competition. However, expect to pay more for them. Also keep in mind that if you opt for the hybrid or plug-in hybrid variants from the competition, they're going to be more fuel efficient than this, but generally speaking, they're going to be a little bit less fun. Even something like the Volvo S60 T8, which has an incredible amount of power, they're actually calling that now the S60 Recharge. It has 400 horsepower or just over 400 horsepower, but it doesn't have much horsepower on the rear axle because of its all-wheel drive system. So it's never going to feel like this G70. It's certainly never going to cut around a track like this. It's not going to feel as engaging or as lively out on your favorite winding mountain road. And it's not going to have the sound that we get out of the new Sport exhaust either. Speaking of the Sport exhaust, it does kind of have a whooshier sound than you find in some of the European competition, but that seems to be because Genesis does not play an augmented engine soundtrack over the speakers. So what we're hearing from the exhaust appears to be actual exhaust sound from the engine. Now, I am still waiting for a verification from Genesis on that. I'll be sure and post down there in the comment section once I actually get it. I actually appreciate the realism with this exhaust note. I like the whooshing sound. It definitely is more realistic than the V8 soundtrack that some Ford and Lincoln models play over the top of their turbocharged six-cylinder engine. For 2022, the G70 is one of the more affordable compact luxury sedans in the US. The 2-liter turbo model is going to start at $37,525. If you want all-wheel drive, that's $39,625. Keep in mind, this is the older 2-liter turbo, not the newer 2.5-liter turbo that we see in other Genesis models. And that might be one reason that you might want to consider the all-new Genesis GV70, because it has the more modern interior design and the more modern engine lineup from the other Genesis vehicles in a relatively similar package. Now, it is going to be a little bit more expensive, but it's also going to be a little bit more practical since it is a new crossover. If you want the more powerful engine, that's going to be the 3.3-liter turbo for $42,100 in rear-wheel drive form, $44,200 for all-wheel drive. And if you get carried away with options, the most expensive you can get your GV70 is a relatively affordable $53,000. Obviously, that's affordable with air quotes because we are talking about a luxury vehicle. With that out of the way, let's dive into the competition. The first competitor has to be the BMW 3 Series. This is the benchmark for the segment, and certainly the vehicle that I think Genesis benchmarked the most when developing the G70, because the G70 reminds me an awful lot of a rear-wheel drive European luxury sedan. It all has to do with the way that Genesis has chosen to tune the suspension, the steering, and the way the engines perform. And that's one of the big differences between the G70 and some of the other competition, is that Genesis decided to put more powerful turbocharged engines in the vehicle and really try and follow the Germans when it comes to performance. Now, they're not matching the Germans. So the BMW 3 Series is going to be a little bit faster, 0 to 60, whether we're talking about the M340i or the BMW 330i, but it's going to be more expensive. In fact, if you want to get your hands on a BMW M340i, you're going to have to pay at least as much for it as the most expensive version of the G70. So there's a lot of value going on with the Genesis. It's also going to have a longer standard warranty, and so far the Genesis models have proven incredibly reliable. It looks like Genesis is really giving Lexus a run for their money when it comes to reliability ratings. The 3 Series definitely has a few advantages. There are a lot more options available, a lot more standalone options, a lot more packages, some extra features that are not available on the G70, and I think that the interior is finished a little bit more nicely. The components, the parts quality, the build quality, etc. is just a little bit better. The trick there, of course, is that the BMW is going to be notably more expensive. It's also worth noting that the G70 is now one of the older vehicles in the Genesis lineup, and the rest of the Genesis lineup definitely has a next level when it comes to interior parts quality. Again, another reason why you might want to take a look at that GV70. Let's move on to the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. The calculus here is honestly basically the same as the BMW. Although I think that in terms of driving dynamics, the G70 and the Mercedes are a little bit closer together. The Mercedes-Benz feels a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, a little bit perhaps more grown-up than the BMW 3 Series. It still has a great feel to it. It still has a very direct rear-wheel drive chassis and weight balance, but it definitely feels a little bit more grown-up, just as you'd expect out of a Mercedes. I love the mini sort of previous generation S-Class design of the C-Class. But if you'd rather not have a scale version of another vehicle that's out there on the road, you might want to take a look at something else. Let's move on to the Acura TLX, because TLX sales are on an extreme rise, and this is definitely a vehicle that's in the same price range as the Genesis G70. But it's quite a different kind of car. The TLX is about the same size on the outside as the Genesis G80, but on the inside, it's about the same size as the G70, and that all has to do with the architecture of the TLX platform. It is based around a front-wheel drive platform with a 2-liter turbo up front. There's also going to be a Type S. It should be on sale by the time you're watching this video. That's going to have a 3-liter turbocharged 6-cylinder engine under the hood. But those engines are hanging out transversely across the front, and that meant that in order to try and give it the long hood profile that luxury car shoppers are after, the hood has to be really quite long. And the front overhang is quite long as well, because that V6 engine is basically sitting on top of the front axle. It's not behind the front axle like we find in the European competition, or the Lexus, or now the Genesis. The result of having the engine where it is means that the TLX doesn't have the same kind of weight balance that we find in the G70, and it is certainly going to be bigger feeling out on the road, and bigger in the average American parking lot as well. It's going to park like a midsize sedan, because on the outside, it is a midsize sedan. But on the inside, it's going to feel relatively compact, because the interior is about the same size as the G70. Acura compensates for the weight balance in large part through their super handling all-wheel drive system, which is absolutely excellent. I love the way that super handling all-wheel drive works, but keep in mind it does add complexity, and of course it's going to add weight to the vehicle, and we have all those other considerations in mind. I think the TLX is an excellent option if you're looking for something with that kind of style, and the interior is well appointed. It's also good value, but I probably would buy the Genesis G70 because it's quite simply more fun, especially if you get the rear-wheel drive version of the G70. There's really no corollary. Super handling all-wheel drive cannot make up for that rear power bias that we find in the Genesis. And as a result, it's going to be a little bit slower 0 to 60. Now let's talk about what I think is the most direct competitor for the G70, the Lexus IS. The IS has really been on a rise when it comes to sales lately, and the G70 has not sold as well as a lot of people had hoped, especially probably Genesis. But I think this comparison is extraordinarily valid, because the G70 is not only less expensive than the Lexus, but it actually handles quite like the Lexus. And that's a good thing, because the Lexus IS is one of the better handling and better feeling vehicles in this segment. Now, when it comes to grip, the Germans definitely take the lead when it comes to actual skid pad numbers, track numbers, etc. But when it comes to steering finesse, steering feel, the Lexus IS is one of the best. The Genesis isn't quite where we see the Lexus, but it's pretty close, and it's going to be a little bit less expensive and have the thrust that I think most shoppers are interested in. And again, Genesis has been doing really well when it comes to reliability, so I would not be surprised if the Genesis was almost as reliable as the Lexus. Logically, a turbocharged engine is not going to be as reliable very long-term, 200,000, 300,000 miles as a naturally aspirated engine, but in the average ownership window, I really wouldn't expect to see much of a difference, if any at all, between these two vehicles. The Genesis infotainment system feels much more modern, it's easier to use. I think the interior is a little bit more modern and easier to use as well. I also think it's a bit more attractive. The Lexus is a little bit pricey, and there are also some odd configurations going on because of the IS's age. Let's roll through those here. So it starts at $39,050, a little bit more expensive than the Genesis. If you want all-wheel drive, though, you don't get the turbo engine. Instead, you get a detuned V6 and an older 6-speed automatic transmission for $41,050. This is one of the only 6-speed automatic transmissions left in anything that is near approaching this kind of price tag. If you want 311 horsepower, that's going to be found in the naturally aspirated V6 in the high power output configuration. It goes back to an 8-speed automatic, rear-wheel drive only for $42,950. If you want the absolutely insane 5-liter V8, you should be sure and check out that video on the channel as well, the IS 500. That sounds absolutely incredible. It really sounds like sex. but it's going to cost you $61,000 is where that model starts. So it's really not a corollary to the G70 with a 3.3-liter turbo. I would actually argue that in the Lexus lineup, there is no corollary to that 3.3-liter turbo. So it makes sense to compare just the IS350 and the IS300 to the Genesis product line. I think the G70 is unquestionably one of the best luxury car values in America right now. Now, is it the best luxury compact sedan? There, I would say probably not, but it is an excellent value. And if you're looking for a compact luxury sedan that's going to be reliable, fun to drive, easy to use when it comes to the infotainment software, etc., that is definitely the G70. But if you want some of those more expensive features, if you want lots of different options on the inside, you won't find those in the G70 at the moment. But I would say you might want to take a look at the GV70, because the GV70 really takes the game further to the Germans than the G70 does, with the number of options, the fact that it has the newer engine lineup with the 2.5-liter turbo, all-wheel drive is standard, 300 horsepower is standard, there's a more powerful 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, etc., and the interior really has a unique and more luxurious design to it. I think actually the biggest competitor for the G70 is going to be the new Genesis GV70. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, all those social places. And of course, check out the IS500 review as well. I'll see all of you later.